All right, if you have your Bibles, we're going to start in a little bit Exodus 32. And once again, I know it's going to be kind of hard. You can juggle in a piece of paper and going through, but also the scriptures. So if you need to follow along with me or just listen to what I'm saying, we'll go through it tonight. We're on point number 8 for our Old Testament study as we're going through this. So as a way of refresher, God created all things. They were created good, and they were really good until we messed them up. Sin happened and the fall of mankind took place. Adam and Eve were cast out of the garden. As they were cast out of the garden, sin continued to escalate to such a bad place that God sent a flood, sent His wrath, His judgment on the earth in the form of a flood. There's only a few that survived, and from that family eventually came a man by the name of Abraham, that God made a covenant with Abraham and said, I'm going to bless you so that from you, somebody from your family is going to bless all the nations of the earth. And Abraham had Isaac. Isaac had Jacob. Jacob had a bunch of kids. And one of those kids was a boy named Joseph, who God placed into Egypt. Even though it was his brother's sin that had caused him there, God is overlooking the entire situation to make sure that he falls into this place so that Joseph, through a series of events, becomes the most powerful nation in the world, the second most powerful man. And at some point, there's a famine that happens, and Joseph is the only one that has the insight to be able to prepare it. And so Joseph's family has to come into Egypt to get food, and there not only do they find food, but they find forgiveness. They find a home. And so Jacob/Israel and his family move all the way into Egypt, and they live there for many years very happily until one day a Pharaoh rises up and says, I don't know these guys. There's a lot of them. We need to kick them out of, we need to put them into slavery, and we want to get as much free help as we can, and they mistreated them poorly. And God heard the cries of His people and said, enough is enough. And He started a series of events, led a man by the name of Moses to lead the people out in an exodus, an exit out of Egypt so that they could go to the promised land and find a place where God, the people of God could have security and peace there. And as they got out of Egypt, they had the Exodus, right? Then all of a sudden, He gives them commandments and tells them, I'm now going to give you commandments, not to get you out of Egypt, but because I've gotten you out of Egypt, now I want you to follow these commandments. These commandments were not a prerequisite for you to get out, but they are proof that you belong to me, so I want you to live and obey these commandments. And how well do those Israelites obey those commandments? Not very well, which is why we get to point number 8, which is called what? Wanderings, okay? The wanderings in the wilderness. And so after the Israelites received the commandments, they began their trek to reach the promised land. Due to their disobedience, they suffer through the wilderness wanderings for 40 years, okay? So any of you ever felt like you've been in a wilderness period in your life? Drifting, going through, and man, where is it going? Some of you, if you've ever known it to be 40 years long, that's a long time, right? 40 days of wandering, wilderness kind of type thing, that's a lot for me. Think about 40 years of what these people are enduring. And so we're going to look through this about the reason for the wanderings. Here's the first line there. The Israelites wandered 40 years in the wilderness before ever reaching the promised land. So once again, wandered 40 years in the wilderness before ever reaching the promised land. So there are some of us in this room that can maybe get that in their mind. And there's also some of us in this room that have yet to reach 40. So just perspective, right? Okay, so some of you right now, you're like, yes, that's me, or at least I feel that way, right? Okay, but imagine that an entire 40 years, 4 decades are spent wandering in the wilderness trying to reach the promised land. Part of their delay was due to worshiping other gods or idols. So remember, these first 2 commandments, no other gods and no idols, and this is something that these guys have a real difficult time to do. And so what God does is that a lot of times they'll frustrate the process, and they sort of seem like they get lost along the way because they've been disobedient. Now, some of us men, we have gotten lost along the way to our vacation because we were disobedient to our wives, right? We didn't listen for directions or ask for directions. Okay, I can feel that conviction right there, okay? I know what that's like, right? But so sometimes we can have this idea, right, that if you've ever wondered, if you've ever struggled to find the direction, imagine this, they're not far off when they leave Egypt to get to Canaan. They're not that very far. But all along the way, they sort of get lost, and they take this turn, and they get messed up, and a lot of times it's God frustrating their paths because He's also said, look, that only there's going to be a certain group of people that actually make it to the promised land. So one example was when Moses was on Mount Sinai receiving the 10 Commandments. So as we look at this, under pressure, we see that Aaron made a golden calf for the people to worship. So under pressure, Aaron made a golden calf for the people to worship. Now let's look at this passage here. Exodus 32, I'll read it to you. It says, when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered themselves together to Aaron and said to him, let me just stop right there. You see how the people, they became impatient and it led to sin, okay? That's just a warning sign for all of us. That God's promised something, and if we're thinking, hey, you need to hurry this up, right? Because if God doesn't work on our timetable, we oftentimes take matters into our own hands, right? And this is a very dangerous thing. And so what happens is that there's impatience here. And so I'll talk a lot of times, especially to young adults that are trying to find that special person in their life. And I'll look at someone and say, what if I were to tell you there was a godly man or a godly woman just right now, and they were wanting to love you for the rest of your life, and man, they love the Lord, and they were going to love you, and they're going to be faithful. Would you wait around for that? And they're like, yeah, I'd wait. I'd break up with him quick, right? Or I'd get rid of her right now. If I knew that person was out there, and I said, really, is that worth waiting for? They said, yeah. I said, is it worth waiting for 10 years? 15? Well, I don't know. I might take one of the riffraff then if it's going to take that long, right? Maybe I can make him a little bit better, right? And so if we're not careful, in patience, God delaying on something, right? At least in their mind, God had promised something and it's just taken a lot longer. And so they thought, okay, we're going to take matters into our own hands. So they gather Aaron. Aaron's in charge while Moses is up there, and he says, up, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. So Aaron said to them, well, take off the rings of gold that are in the ears of your wives, your sons and your daughters, and bring them to me. So all the people took off the rings of gold that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he received the gold from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made a golden calf. And they said, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Now, catch this, okay? First off, where did these bunch of former slaves get gold to make a golden calf with? The Egyptians. And why were the Egyptians giving away their gold? Yeah, God made them, right? Because when God put that Passover on the Egyptian people, they said, get out of here, take our stuff. We don't want anything to do with you anymore. We're not going to mess around. You take all of our treasures. And so they took a gift from God as a replacement for God. Follow that? Here's this gift that God has given you. Here's this gold. And they go, let's take what God has given and we're going to craft it into actually a God for ourselves. Now, folks, can the possessions do that for us right now? Man, here's a gift from God. It's a house. It's a car. It's a whatever it is. It's a good gift. These are good things, right? They're wonderful things. And yet if we're not careful, they can turn into a God themselves. We can put them in that wrong position, right? And so they come in, and I think it's just a humorous kind of thing, right? That here is Aaron and these people saying, here, we're going to make us a God. That's the complete reverse of it, right? God's supposed to make us, and yet here we are trying to make a God, right? Look at verse 5. It says, and when Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it. And Aaron made a proclamation and said, tomorrow shall be a feast to the who? Lord. Look how that's spelled. All caps. Capital L-O-R-D. If you guys have been here for a few weeks, what name does that represent? God's name, his personal covenantal name that he gave to Moses out of the burning bush. I am who I am. I am Yahweh, Jehovah. That's that name. So, when they made this golden calf, they thought in their mind, yeah, we're still worshiping Yahweh. We're just going to worship him like this. What they were doing was they were taking some of the imagery that they found in Egypt and other stuff, and they're just sort of combining it all together. So this is really breaking the second commandment rather than the first. You see that? First commandment, no other gods. Second commandment, don't make anything to a visual representation of the one true God. And this is what they're doing here. So he even says, he uses the Lord. Verse 6, and they rose up early the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. And the Lord said to Moses, go down, well, listen to this wording, for your people, whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt, have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly out of the way that I commanded them. They have made for themselves a golden calf and have worshipped it and sacrificed to it and said, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And the Lord said to Moses, I have seen this people. Behold, it is a stiff-necked people. Now therefore, let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them. Listen to this. in order that I may make a great nation of you. Now think about this for a second. We look at what happens here, that God informs Moses what is transpiring down the mountain and tells Moses he wants to destroy the people. And it's interesting because throughout this entire narrative up to this point, it's always God going, these are my people who I brought up with my mighty hand, with my outstretched arm. And the moment that they get rebellious, God goes, these are your people, Moses. You're the one who brought them up. And I imagine Moses going, now wait a minute. This whole time, you've been saying these are your people, your hand doing this. Like, why in the world is this changing? God is not tempting Moses here, but he is testing him. Because Moses has been going up to Pharaoh and says this, you need to let God's people go. And he says, well, whose people are they? Well, this is the God of three guys they always would name. I follow the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. What was God saying in this moment? Hey, you've been wandering in the wilderness with these folks under somebody else's name. Everybody knows these are the people of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Let's just start over, Moses. This could be called the people of Moses. Doesn't that sound better to you? Moses go, man, that sounds a lot better for the history books. I'm just the one leading these people through, but Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they're just, retiring it up and enjoying life, not in the middle of all this stuff. I'm here in the wilderness. God goes, I'll just start over with you. Let's just do that. I'll just start over and make a great nation from you. Look what happens in verse 11. But Moses implored the Lord, his God, and said, O Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people? These are mine. Look. Whom, what? You have brought up out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand. So what is Moses doing there? I would tell you, he just passed the test is what he did. God going, hey, Moses, this is your people. You did this, so why don't we just start it over with you? And he goes, whoa, these are not my people. These are your people. Not my leadership got them out. Your power got them out. So let me get this right. And God going, okay, you've been listening. Good, right? And then verse 12, this is what he's concerned about. Why should the Egyptians say, with evil intent did he bring them out to kill them in the mountains and to consume them from the face of the earth? Turn from your burning anger and relent from this disaster against your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, to whom you swore by your own self and said to them, I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and all this land that I have promised I will give your offspring, and they shall inherit it forever. And the Lord relented from the disaster that he had spoken of bringing to his people. Did you catch that? This is incredible. What happens is that Moses implores God to spare his wrath. But what happens in a moment is that once Moses sees the people, he kills the perpetrators. It's like Moses is just swinging back and forth between attitudes, what he wants to do. But this is beautiful what we see in what goes on. Moses passes the test. Hey, these are your people. You brought them out, and you promised to three people, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob / Israel, you promised to them on your own self. And so what is Moses realizing this? This isn't so huge. Moses knew God's will because he knew God's word. Right? He knew God's will because he knew God's word. God had promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, your people will make it to this promised land. There's someone coming from this family who's going to bless all the nations of the world. And when God has made a promise in his word, you can take that to the bank. You never have to worry if it's going to come true. So what is Moses praying? He's actually praying when he's talking to God. God, you promised. I'm begging you, do this, God, because you said in your word, so I can say boldly, I know what your word says, and I can pray boldly. And so he prays against this, and God says, okay, that's great. Now what takes place next is kind of humorous, right? Because when we go down, read verse 15. Moses turned and went down from the mountain, with the 2 tablets of it, the testimony in his hand, tablets that were written on both sides, on the front and on the back they were written. The tablets were the work of who? Of God. And the writing was the writing of God engraved on the tablets. When Joshua heard the noise of the people as they shouted, he said to Moses, there is noise of war in the camp. But he said, it is not the sound of shouting for victory or the sound of the cry of defeat, but the sound of singing that I hear. Somebody's singing a song. That's what's going on down there. And as soon as he came near the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, Moses' anger burned hot. He threw the tablets out of his hands and broke them at the foot of the mountain. He took the calf that they had made and burned it with fire and ground it to powder and scattered it on the water and made the people of Israel drink it. Now, this is just funny to me. It's just like he goes, all right, it's like David. I'll knock you out, Goliath, and then I'm going to take your head off. It's just like he keeps going even further, right? He takes the calf, he burns it with fire, then he grinds it to powder, then he scatters it on the water, and then he makes the people of Israel drink it. Which means that if they drink it, one day it will come back out. But at that point, nobody probably wants it anymore, right? And this is what Moses is saying. This is what this is worth to me. This is what this filth is worth to me. This is what this looks like to me. And look what happens next. Moses said to Aaron, "What did this people do to you that you have brought such a great sin upon them?" And Aaron said, "Let not the anger of my Lord burn hot. You know the people. They are set on evil. For they said to me, 'Make us gods who shall go before us.' As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. So I said to them, 'Let any who have gold take it all.' So they gave it to me, and I threw it in the fire, and out came this calf." Wow. Isn't that amazing, right? Now, does that sound ridiculous to anybody? Anybody? It does to me too. But let me tell you something. I've said probably some doozies like that myself. Well, this just happened. God must want it to happen, right? I mean, I was just going along this way, and this happened. So-and-so came up to me, and, we can just make up all kinds of crazy stuff and blame God for it, right? And here they are going, look, you know the people, I just threw it in there, and it sort of came out. It's not my fault. Not my fault. Moses, we haven't seen anybody want to lay the blame on anybody else in the Bible so far, have we, right? This happens all the time. In verse 25, this is funny. "And when Moses saw that the people had broken loose," in parentheses, "for Aaron had let them break loose." Did you catch that? You're not hiding behind this, Aaron. We see what's taking place here. So obviously also this probably means, when it says that these people were dancing, it's probably like, I know some of you've grown up in a denomination where, just even swaying back to side is like, oh, that's dancing. Somebody's got to stop that, and somebody's going to come out. Some of you are like, no, that's a little bit more okay. I don't think this is like in the spirit dancing, okay? I don't think this is organized line dancing, most likely. I think what this is at this moment is that they are mixing religion with a whole lot of filth. And there's a lot of promiscuity going along, a lot of sexual stuff. And why? Because they just got out of Egypt, and they knew that the best type of worship services in Egypt was when you get a little bit of religion and also a little bit of everything else. So they were trying to mix it together. Let me see if we can make this spiritual thing also sensual somewhat. Verse 26, "And then Moses stood in the gate of the camp and said, 'Who is on the Lord's side? Come to me.' All the sons of Levi gathered around him, and he said to them, 'Thus says the Lord God of Israel, put your sword in your side, each of you, and go to and fro from gate to gate throughout the camp, and each of you kill his brother and his companion, his neighbor.' And the sons of Levi did according to the word of Moses. And that day about 3,000 men of the people fell. And Moses said, 'Today you have been ordained.'" "Today you've been ordained for the service of the Lord, each one at the cost of his son and his brother, so that he might bestow a blessing upon you this day." The next day Moses said to the people, "You have sinned a great sin. And now I will go to the Lord. Perhaps I can make atonement for your sin." So Moses returned to the Lord and said, "Alas, this people has sinned a great sin. They have made for themselves gods of gold. But now, if you will forgive their sin," y'all ready? "But if not, please blot me out of your book that you have written." Do you see what Moses just did in this moment? Moses says, "God, the sin that they have committed is deserving of death. But I'm begging you, give them another chance. And if you need somebody to pay the price, would you take me, blot me out of your book, and let them go free?" Now, does that sound like anybody to you? It sounds like Jesus. This is a foreshadow of Jesus. So through this incident, Moses develops a shepherd-like quality who would rather be punished than have one of his sheep punished. What an incredible moment. And can I just be straight with you? I think all this that God is doing, that whole testing that he was doing with Moses, hey, your people you brought out with your hand, I think it's all leading up to this moment. God is trying to build a shepherd-like quality into Moses that he doesn't have until right now. And so what happens is, he says, okay, I will do whatever it takes. Blot me out of your book. I don't know about you, but does that seem a little bit overwhelming? I'd be like, God, yeah, you can get them. Go get them. They deserve it. They really deserve it. They're all crazy. I don't like half of them anyway. Take them out, God. start over. And he goes, no, blot me out. Can somebody do me a favor? I need somebody to look up Romans 9:3 and somebody else look up John 10:15 for me. If you can look those verses up, because Moses is not the only person that we see in the Bible that has this type of bent, this type of thinking. In fact, there are some other people in the Bible that sort of display this type of character that says this. Did Moses believe that someone needed to die for this sin? Yeah, he did. God, I know your anger burns hot, but can I stand in the way of your anger in these people? Let me take it on behalf of them. So we also find that through the life of Paul, we see in Romans chapter 9, verse 3, that Paul says something very, very similar. Who has that verse? I wouldn't mind reading it. Jeremy, you got it? Will you read it out nice and strong for us?
Yeah. For I could wish that I myself were accursed and cut off from Christ for the sake of my brothers, my kinsmen according to the flesh.
Okay. Paul is talking about how Israelites need the gospel and how so many of them have rejected Christ. And he says this, I would rather myself be cut off if they would just have a chance to receive the gospel. Guys, I don't know if I love anybody that much, if I'm going to be straight with you. I wish I was a better shepherd than that. But if you say, Travis, either you're going to heaven or everybody else is, I'm like, I don't know, God. You sure? Maybe my example of going that way couldn't bring something? No. Moses said, I would rather be blotted out of your book before they endure your wrath. Put it on me. Paul says, I'd rather be taken out for the sake of my kinsmen. I want them to know the truth. So that means if I'm accursed, that I'll be accursed for the sake of them. And then we get to John chapter 10, verse 15. You got that, Rick?
Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep.
Here's Jesus saying this. I know the Father. Father knows me, and I lay down my life for the sheep. You see this example that we see in Moses displayed in the person of Jesus, also echoed in the life of Paul, this idea of sacrificial love. Now, what's interesting about Moses' situation, when he says this, verse 33, look how the Lord responds. But the Lord said to Moses, whoever has sinned against me, I will blot out of my book. But now go lead the people to the place about which I have spoken to you. Behold, my angel shall go before you. Nevertheless, in the day when I visit, I will visit their sin upon them. Then the Lord sent a plague on the people because they made the calf. Listen to this. The one that Aaron made. Just sort of make sure that God hasn't been duped in all of this. Like, all right, I know all that, but let me make sure I'm completely aware. So get this. Moses offers to be a sacrifice for the people, and God says no. I would think at this point in redemptive history, this would be a good time to say, okay, well, yeah, if you're willing to do that, okay, Moses, that'd be a great step up. Why couldn't Moses be the substitute? Because Moses had sin himself. He wasn't a lamb without blemish. He had sin. And so he goes, that's great, you're willing, but you're not perfect. And that's why this won't work, Moses. You have to be not only willing, but you have to be without blemish to do this. And there's nobody that has been without blemish up to this point. Moses goes, but I'm willing, but you're not perfect. So what Moses was, is he was a willing sacrifice, but he wasn't a sacrifice that was sufficient. Follow me? There's only one that would be sufficient, and that's the person of Jesus. So Moses foreshadows what Jesus will do, but only Jesus can fill that because he's perfect. He can step into that and say, let me step in there. And so once again, Moses is foreshadowing the story of Christ. So even on a hard day, long day, sleepy day, man, I hope that just goes, wow, what a person of Jesus and how he longs for us. Listen to this. Next, part of their delay was due to grumbling regarding their circumstances. I know y'all have never known anybody in the people of God that have been complainers, but there's a few out there, right? Part of their delay was due to grumbling regarding the circumstances. They complain about a lot. Now, be honest, their situation, I don't know about you, would you like to wander in the wilderness for 40 years? Anybody just say, oh, that sounds like a good vacation. I wouldn't want that either. But compared to what they had been going through, was it a pretty good situation? Yeah, it was difficult, but compared to what they've been going through, well, they complain about not having enough food, not having enough water, and then even the type of food concerning the manna. I love it in one of the passages that they say, we don't have any food, we don't have any water, and we don't like the type of food we've got. What? I thought you just said you didn't have any food. Y'all read that story this morning, didn't you, right? Numbers 21? We don't have any food, we don't have any water, and we don't like the food we got. Wait a minute, I thought you just said you didn't have it. Well, it's just that bad, right? It's just awful, awful, awful. And so they're continually going through and having to go through all this wilderness stuff. They're complaining, and at different times throughout this, what's happening is that God is allowing these people to sort of see the error of their ways, and He's also sometimes punishing the people. But at other times, He is allowing grace, and there's all these symbolism that's going through. If you were in gospel group this morning, you saw the incredible story that is Numbers 21, right? Hopefully, it made you go. I had somebody in college that was discipling me that says, do you know John 3:16? And I said, absolutely. And I quoted it to him, and I thought, I know my stuff. He goes, quote to me John 3:14 and 15. And I went, what? I've never seen an NFL player putting that on his face or whatever. Like, I don't know that. What's that about? And he says, just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so the Son of Man will be lifted up for all to see. For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son. Now what is that a picture of? Maybe your teacher pointed this out, but in the next time you see an ambulance drive by, I want you to look on the symbol of that ambulance. And what do you see? Yeah, there's a snake around the pole, right there, symbolizing this. And so once again, this is a complicated story, right? But the people are complaining, we don't have any food, we don't have any water, and we don't like the food that we've got. And God goes, that's it. And He sends a snake, fiery snakes. Some of you would be like, if it was garden snakes, that's enough, God, right? Okay, we repent, right? But these are poisonous snakes, poisonous at this place that are coming along, and you get bit, and you don't have a lot of time. So now just think about this. Where's the first serpent that we see in the Bible? Anybody? In the Garden of Eden, right? Was that a healthy encounter with a serpent? No. Represented sin, represented temptation, represented the devil. And so there's this symbol that God sends. So the people are complaining so much that God sends His wrath, His judgment in the form of a snake towards these people, right? So they come in and they bite them, and all of a sudden the people go, okay, God, we're sorry. Please take away the snakes. We will take the manna over the snakes any day, God. We're sorry for complaining, right? And God goes, okay, Moses, this is what I want you to do. I want you to take a bronze pole there and make it sort of craft it like a snake, and people, when they look at it, they'll be healed. Now, to you, let's just be honest. What does that sound like to you? Anybody? Sounds like idol worship, doesn't it? Sounds like a totem pole or something kind of like, what in the world is God doing, right? It just sounds weird. Now, for all this, here's God's wrath coming in the form of a snake, and now He wants to elevate that symbol of that wrath so that those who put their faith in that symbol can be healed. So, when we get to the New Testament, for the wages of sin is death, which means that every sinner deserves death. And what is the symbol of death in the New Testament? It's the cross. So God says, well, let's take that symbol of what the wages of sin is, that is biting at the people. Remember, even in Genesis 3, we learned what was the promise that serpent seed was going to be nipping at the heels of man all the day. And all of a sudden, some man's going to come crush his head. Here these snakes, they're biting, they're taking people out. And so what does God do? Let me take a visual symbol of what my wrath is against the people, hold it up, and that can be their faith, that can be their salvation. And we get the person of Jesus. The wages of sin is death, and this is what all of us deserve. And how are we saved? You put that up high for people to see, and unless they place their faith in it, they will perish. Now, we were going through this with our kids, preparing for church yesterday, and just talking through the passage together and whatnot, and really looking at it, and it was just a lot of good conversations when snakes and poles are involved, right? And just talking about, what would you do? What would you do? And I said, okay, get this picture. I said, let's just say, because we've got in our neighborhood, we've got these creeks and stuff that we can sort of go on these adventures. And what's crazy is it's a fairly large neighborhood. There's all these kind of creeks and ponds, and sometimes, guys, I'm not lying, we'll go out there, and I have been out there on like little nature walks or trail rides or whatnot, and I have probably seen one person out there, and all the times that we've been out there since we've been living out there, nobody ever was out there. So like, to me and the kids, one day the kids were like, Dad, it's like all of this is ours. I'm like, just tell your friends that, okay? All of this is ours. That's right. Your dad has provided this for you. It's available for anybody, but I feel like we're the only ones who take it. So we'll just go on these trails, and we'll see nothing but just like animals and us, right? Just beautiful stuff. Go down to the creek, go down the pond. It's just awesome, right? And I just said, okay, let's just imagine that we're down there and we're messing around the creek, and like Dad's talked to you about, you go make sure you never, step over a log without, knowing what's over there on the other side. A snake could be there. I said, if a snake bit you and all of a sudden the poison is going through you and you know that God has set up something for you to be healed from, what would you do if you said, in that situation, the Israelites are sitting there and they get bit by the snake, and they know Moses has said, well, if you run to the pole over there and look at it, you'll be okay. I'd go, yeah, right. I'm going to the doctor. If I get bit by a snake, I'm going to see my mama, right? I'm going to see somebody. And if you'd have gone to the doctor, if you'd gone to your mom, if you'd have gone to see your friend, you'd die. You'd die. So what do? You run and look at this pole standing up there saying, this is my only hope. And what is it? It's faith in the way that God said salvation would come about. So when it says, John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son that whoever would believe, we have dumbed that down. Yeah, I believe in God. Not the way these Israelites believed in that pole. You follow me? Get out of my way. I'm going to die. I got to see that thing. Move. I've got just minutes left. There it is. This is what God said. God says healed right there. That's what belief looks like. Get out of my way. Not going to mama, not going to doctor, not going to pastor, not going to counselor. I need Jesus. That's what it's a picture of. So as this happens, even in the wilderness, God is showing these people their need for grace and their need for the coming cross of Jesus. And we get to this place also about the tabernacle, right? As this moving kind of place as they would walk and dwell with God during this time. The word tabernacle means dwelling place. In fact, in John 1, when it says the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, the word actually means the Word, Jesus became flesh and tabernacled among us. He just dwelt with us. He lived with us, among us. The tabernacle was to be in the middle of the camp, and God would meet with his people there. So this was kind of the tent that they would put together to construct this mobile facility for worship, right? So as they're going in the wilderness, this is how they would meet with God in this sacred place. The only thing I can equate it to, there's different, a lot of friends, and sometimes I've helped out with different church plants. It's a wonderful blessing to be able to have a facility like this where you can walk into, and most of the time we can walk in and everything's working right, and the air and the lights and everything else. But for a church plant, a lot of times you're getting there at 5 in the morning and setting stuff up and trying to get things going. The tabernacle was like this. They'd have to move, and then they'd set it back up, and they'd have a place to worship. Well, Exodus 25 through 31 gives precise instructions concerning the construction. And then Exodus 35 through 39 records how they followed every command. Now, can you see how the narrative of Exodus dramatically shifts at chapter 25? We're talking deliverance. We're talking, God's judgment on the Egyptians. We're talking Red Sea. We're talking golden calf. And then all of a sudden, make sure to get this type of fabric when you do it, right? What? What? This is and make sure you get the poles are this size here and do this. And so the book just changes really quick. This is why some of you were reading through Exodus one day and you kind of tanked out somewhere along the way. But this is important because God says, I have specific instructions how I want this to be built. And then Exodus 35 through 39 records that they actually followed every command. And why do I think that's important? Well, how often do you see these people actually do be obedient? God's going, no, write this down. This is important. It actually does happen every once in a while. They got it. And let's write it down, right? Well, in between these passages, there is the golden calf incident that revealed the Israelites' ongoing desire for other gods. We see that, but so that's the only thing that's really kind of in between those two passages as they're building this tabernacle. And yet, as we turn to the page there, you see that tabernacle had one specific kind of place in there that was very, very important. It's called the Ark of the what? Ark of the Covenant, right? So this is a picture of kind of what the tabernacle would have looked like in those days. So there's a kind of a fence, so to speak, around the major enclosure of it. Once again, it was in the center of the camp. What was that? You think that was symbolic? Sure it was. This is the center. God is the center of our lives, Israel. Don't you mess this up, right? He's the centerpiece of it. And so you'd go in there, and a few people could go in. There's basins and washing places that you're purifying yourself just as you walk in. And the closer that you get into that place, the tent itself is what we call the holy place. And then there's a section of it called the what? Holy of Holies, right? So the further that you go in, right, the more serious this gets. This is a picture. I'm sure you can read all those little things there. This is a picture that I took from the ESV Study Bible, but kind of gives you a little bit picture of some of the things that you'll see on it. But once again, just a picture of there's all these curtains, there's all these linens. If you notice, you may or may not be able to see this, but you see right there on that curtain. All right, so you would walk in here. Here's like kind of a priest walking in. Here's a tent there, a table, candlesticks, all these different things, washing basin. And then there is another curtain that is covering up the Holy of Holies, and that's where the Ark of the Covenant is, right there, that piece of furniture. Right there, there is a unique, if you can tell, there's an object that is sewn into that fabric, and it was a specific angelic being. Does anybody know who it was? Cherubim. Okay? So the cherubim is set there in the fabric, done that. Same way as the temple was set up, that the cherubim was put there as a dividing place between people and the presence of God. Why? Because the sin had taken them out. And this is what's beautiful. What was the angelic being that was at the Garden of Eden stationed to keep people out? Cherubim, right? You guys sinned. You don't deserve to be in here anymore. Try to get past me and my flaming sword, right? Okay? And everybody backed off. And so then when they get the tabernacle, hey, when you're separating the presence of God, the Ark of the Covenant that represents that, I want you to weave that in there. I want you to make sure that you see that fabric. And the same thing when the temple goes up, those cherubim are blocking the people from the presence of God. Why? Because their sin keeps them from there. And when Jesus dies on the cross, what happens? Rips in two. Can you imagine being in the temple that day going, you're supposed to watch over it, make sure nobody goes in there, and all of a sudden the earth starts shaking and that curtain gets, and that cherubim sort of rips in two, and all of a sudden you see the Holy of Holies right there. You see the Ark of the Covenant and you go, what in the world is this? God is saying, you can come back home. You can come back in the presence of God now. God's not angry. There's been a substitute that has paid the penalty for sin. You can come back into Eden. You can come back and dwell with the presence of God now because of what Jesus has done. And so that veil in the temple tore right in two. The cherubim lays down his sword in that moment and says, okay, it's time to come back home. So that even the furniture, even all this stuff is put there very significantly. This is the picture of, some of you like, I recognize that from that Indiana Jones movie, right? Okay. Honestly, there are some things that they hit fairly well in that, right? And there's, of course, faces melting at the end. That may happen. Who knows, right? But there's this picture of them saying, hey, let's find the Ark of the Covenant, right? Because every time the Israelites had that and they walked around, they won their battles. So the idea was, well, then that's probably what the Nazis were looking for, right? Let's get that piece of artifact. Well, you go, that sounds kind of absurd, but that happens in the Old Testament all the time. Let's steal the Ark. They win the battles with the Ark, so let's get one of those, right? And so here's this picture of this piece of furniture that is incredible, that, once again has some specific things in it. You see the poles there represented. We'll sort of talk through this. The sole piece of furniture in the most holy place signified the presence of God while Israel was in the wilderness. It's one piece of furniture. The Ark of the Covenant sits there. And it is also, the ark was a wooden chest overlaid with pure gold. So it's very, very significant, very kind of beautiful structure there. And once again, we normally know it from the movies and whatnot, but it was an actual piece of furniture, and it was the sole thing in there, and it represented the presence of God. And it represented so much of the holiness of God as what they would allow people to come in and see and what they wouldn't see. And so it contained the original stone tablets of the Ten Commandments, an urn that contains some manna, and Aaron's staff. So it has imagine it's kind of a living, breathing, walking museum of all these artifacts of God's faithfulness, right? So the original Ten Commandments, who wrote those Ten Commandments, by the way? God did. We want to hold on to those. An urn that contains some manna. It's just a reminder of, hey, look what God has done. He's provided for us along the way. Aaron's staff had some pretty significant roles throughout the time there as it would go. And so all of that stuff was in there. The ark was not to be touched by human hands, but priests would hold it on what? On poles, right? Because it was just such a holy thing that they would put it on poles, and these guys would walk and journey with it. Some of you will remember what happens when King David is bringing the Ark of the Covenant back into Jerusalem. And instead of doing this, what do? Does anybody remember? Put it on this cart being pulled by a bunch of ox. Where did they learn that from? The Philistines who had captured it for them. And all of a sudden, the oxen stumble and sort of hit a pothole in the road, and the ark starts moving backwards and forwards. And all of a sudden, this guy named Uzzah puts out his hand just like every single one of us would do, right? Let's stop it. Oh, that ark's going to hit the dirt. I don't want that ark to touch the dirt. The dirt is dirty. And he thought for a moment that somehow the dirt was a lot worse off than he was, and he was wrong. Dead wrong. Because he stops that thing from falling, and God says, you think you're more holy than the dirt? And he drops dead right there. And the people go, what in the world is happening? And David goes, just stop this processional. I don't want anybody else dying in this worship service. Hey, whose house is that over there? That's Obed-Edom's. Obed-Edom, that's going to your house. The Ark of the Covenant's going into your house. I just hope Obed-Edom did not have toddlers, right? Do not touch the gold shiny box in the middle of the house, okay? Whatever you do, kids, you're just going around. Like, no, I'm serious about this. Don't touch this. Stays in his house, I think, for about 3 months. So much so that Obed-Edom's, he's being blessed, and David goes, oh, so God's okay now? Okay, I do want it back. And then it says something very specific. They go up there and it says they put it on poles. Oh, David remembered the Bible. David remembered what God said. There are instructions to follow. And guess what? It was a beautiful, wonderful worship experience. And so there's all these specific things about it. Another thing about this is important to know that the cherubim had wings that outstretched over the mercy seat. You saw this, right? There are these two angelic beings, and one is this way, the other one's that way, and it's there. And the picture was this, is that when God would come in and the high priest would come, some of you know this, that at certain times in Israelites' history, when the high priest would even go into the Holy of Place, what would they attach to him? They put a rope around his ankle. Why? Because they thought if he died in there, they could just drag him out. Nobody else would have to go in there and get killed. That's how serious they took it, okay? And so with this, the idea was that the high priest would go in the Holy of Place, and then they would sacrifice a lamb, and he would atone for the sins of the people, and that God would visit with his people like he is sitting there on the mercy seat, on that little piece of furniture, almost like that. That's a seat. And the cherubim were sitting there right here going like, this is our king right here. This is a specific spot that nobody else sits in right here, where God comes and he forgives his people. Now, just for a thought, for example, do you remember in the moment where Mary and the other women, they run to the tomb and they see that it's empty, and then all of a sudden they come running out and they go, Peter, John, you won't believe this. The tomb's empty. Jesus isn't there. And they take off running, and they go in there. And some of you can remember that when they go into that place, there's this kind of stone slab that somebody would be laid out across. And what was in the middle, or what was sitting on that stone slab? 2 angels flanking a position, and right there in the middle is folded up clothes of our Savior. Just think about it. A piece of furniture, 2 angels sitting right there, and there was something there right there in the middle right before them. It's this beautiful picture of God even going, this is going to be fun. Watch this. Let's reenact the Ark of the Covenant right here in the middle of Jesus' tomb, where Jesus had sat on the mercy seat, and not only he defeated sin, but now he's defeated death. And he rises from that, and the angels just sit there long enough so that people can start connecting the dots going, oh, this is not just some plan B. This has been everything God's been moving towards with this. So these cherubim, they outstretch over the mercy seat. It's a beautiful picture. And then we get to this, once again, how that looks. Let's get to the death of Moses. Standing upon the cusp of entering the promised land, Moses gathered the nation of Israel together for final instructions, which is the book of Deuteronomy, before embarking upon their long-awaited journey. I think we mentioned this about 10 weeks ago or so I don't mind refreshing us. But remember, when you see the book Deuteronomy, it kind of looks like deuce or duo, right? Which means what? 2. So Deuteronomy means second telling. I'm reminding you. I told you these commandments. I'm going to remind you one more time. Why? Because we are about to go into the promised land, and we have wandered for 40 years because you people hadn't obeyed these commandments. So I'm going to tell you one more time, right? Y'all ever had that moment when your mama was about to take you into a store, and there was a lot of nice breakable stuff, and she gives you that come to Jesus talk? If you touch it, anything in there, if you even breathe in the wrong direction, right? Don't touch anything. This is what Moses is doing. One more time, I'm going to remind you guys. I'm going to remind you one more time about how serious this is. And so he tells them, reminds them of some of the commandments. The only adults remaining from the original Exodus party are Moses, Joshua, and Caleb. So the only adults remaining from the original Exodus party are Moses, Joshua, and Caleb. Joshua and Caleb, why did they get in there? Remember last week in our gospel groups, right? It is we got faith, we can take these guys. All the other 10 spies are, no, we can't. We can't beat these guys. And Joshua and Caleb are like, yeah, we can. Yeah, they're big. God's bigger. We'll be fine. So Joshua and Caleb were promised that they'll make it to the promised land. Moses seems like he should, but something happens along the way where Moses is told, you can't even get in there. So all of these adults who have left Egypt at that Exodus, that none of them make it into the promised land. Up to this point, the only ones remaining are Moses, Joshua, and Caleb, and we're about to get from 3 down to 2. As they are about to take the land, God tells Moses that he will not lead the people into the promised land due to sin he committed in the wilderness. So they're about there. They're literally at the spot where they've been waiting to get to for a long time. God tells Moses, this is the end of the line for you, buddy. You're not going to be able to hit the finish line. And I imagine Moses go, you got to be kidding me. I have put up with these people for how long? And I can see that line over there. Listen, I at least need to put my feet in that dirt one time before I go. And he goes, no, we got to go. We got to go back to what happened here. On 2 recorded occasions at the same location, the people complained about not having water. Okay? 2 recorded occasions, same location, the people complained about not having water. I want you to turn to Exodus 17 because I want you to read this because this is so important to understand what's happening here. The first time, God instructs Moses to strike the rock and water comes out. And we'll read this passage together in Exodus 17. This is before even the 10 Commandments have been given. Okay? Starting verse 1, all the congregation of the people of Israel moved on from the wilderness of Sin by stages according to the commandment of the Lord and camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. Therefore the people quarreled with Moses and said, give us water to drink. And Moses said to them, why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord? But the people thirsted there for water, and the people grumbled against Moses and said, why did you bring us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst? So Moses cried to the Lord, what shall I do with this people? They are almost ready to stone me. And the Lord said to Moses, pass on before the people, taking with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock at Oreb. And you shall strike the rock, and water shall come out of it, and the people will drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. And he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah because of the quarreling of the people of Israel, because they tested the Lord by saying, is the Lord among us or not? Now, this is, you talk about faith. People are about to stone you. They are thirsting, dehydrated. Everybody's ready to turn on you. And you go, God, what do you want me to do? I want you to take that staff. You see that rock over there? Yep. I want you to hit it really hard with that piece of wood. Okay? And what's going to happen? Water's going to pour out of it. Oh, yeah, because that happens all the time, God, right? I mean, how often do you go up to a rock, hit it with a piece of staff, and here's all this fresh water for the people to drink? And what's interesting is, did God tell Moses to do that alone? He said, get the elders of Israel together and do it in front of them. Can I just do this with just you and me, God? You show me that you can do it, and then I'll call everybody. No. You go up there right now, you get them in front. Why? Because faith, I want to see how much you trust me. So I can just imagine Moses going, okay, guys, I know everybody's flipping out there. They're ready to stone me. They're ready just to go back to Egypt. But I've got water. And they're like, where's water? We haven't seen water. It's over there in that rock. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the staff. I'm going to hit it really hard. Water's going to come out. And they think, he's gone crazy, right? They're thinking to themselves, like, this is it. Well, Moses goes up there. Can you just imagine? I don't know if you hit it hard or whatever, but he goes up there and he strikes the rock on its side, and the water comes out from it. Now, picture this. I imagine that of all these sinful, quarreling people, Moses had an idea. Take that staff and hit somebody with it, I guarantee, right? I imagine there's a few Israelites he would have liked to take that staff to and hit, right? Let me ask you, did those Israelites deserve to get hit with a staff? Yeah. Did the rock deserve to get hit by the staff? The rock hadn't done nothing wrong. Rock's just sitting there doing what rocks do, just sitting there, right? And now all of a sudden, because these people sin, this rock is going to get struck and water is going to come from his side. I'm sorry, I said his. Oh, you following this? There is another time, people, where the people deserve to be upon a cross. And yet Jesus goes to the cross even though he did not deserve it. And he is struck with a piece of, what's on his back? Wood. Struck with it, attached to it. And then he's speared in the side. And what comes from his side? Water and blood. Water and blood. From the rock who knew no sin. From the rock that is higher than I. struck on behalf of the people who deserve to be struck. Water comes out that is life-giving. Not only the water in the wilderness, but the water and the blood that comes from the side of Jesus. Now, the beautiful, beautiful stuff. Now turn to Numbers chapter 20, because the same situation happens again. You would think that people learn their lesson, but we just know ourselves too well, don't we, to know it's not always the way it goes down. Because the second time, God instructs Moses to do what to the rock? To speak to the rock, but Moses strikes it instead. Now, this is, you may think, wait a minute, is there a mistake here? It's not a mistake in what I wrote to you. Let me read it to you in Exodus 20. It says there in verse 10, Then Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock, and he said to them, Hear now, you rebels. Shall we bring water from you out of this rock? Now, I need to go backwards. I'm sorry. Let me go back to verse 2 to set it up right. Now there was no water for the congregation. They assembled themselves together with Moses and against Aaron, and the people quarreled with Moses and said, Would that we had perished when our brothers perished before the Lord. Why have you brought the assembly of the Lord into this wilderness, that we should die here, both we and our cattle? And why have you made us come up out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place? It is no place for grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, and there is no water to drink. Then Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly to the entrance of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces. And the glory of the Lord appeared to them. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Take the staff, assemble the congregation, you and Aaron your brother, and tell or speak to the rock before their eyes to yield its water. And you shall bring water out of the rock for them and give drink to the congregation and their cattle. And Moses took the staff from before the Lord as he commanded him. Now wait a minute. Moses is going, you imagine, oh yeah, same place. We did this before. I know. Okay, stand before the people. Take the staff. God says, get before the people. Check. Take the staff. Check. And I know, strike the rock. He goes, speak to it. What? As if striking the rock for water is not enough faith. God goes, no. This time, I want you just to talk to it. Say, water, come forth. I don't know what you say, right? You say like really some kind of way that makes it sound right. I want you to speak to the rock this time, Moses. And Moses goes, but last time I struck it and that worked. I know. But that was then and you're a little bit further now. I believe you can even trust me more. Last time it seemed a little bit somewhat reasonable. Maybe break something out and water would come forth. Now I just want you to talk to it. Now who can get the credit for this one? Only God, right? Now follow me, for example. If water comes forth from a rock, most people would say, okay, God did that. But if there's a man with his muscles bulging and he's taking his staff and he's cracking at that, some people might think, oh, well, Moses had a little bit of part to do with that. You follow me? When you talk to a rock, do you get any of the credit when the water comes out? Nobody's getting the credit, but who? God. That's the point. Now look what happens. Verse 10. Then Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock, and he said to them, Hear now, you rebels, shall we bring water from you out of this rock? And Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock with his staff. How many times? Twice. Isn't that interesting? And then look what happens. And water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank and their livestock. Now, it doesn't tell it how all this happens. But Moses has been told, speak to the rock. And what does he do? He strikes it. How many times does he strike it? First time he struck it, how many times? Once. Okay. God told him to speak, and he goes, all right, last time it worked, I'm going to strike it. He struck it. Nothing came out. Everybody's staring. I'm doing it one more time. And the water comes out this time. He goes, whew, good. That's good. All right, good. I just make sure everything's good. I just didn't strike it exactly right. Maybe I need to say a quick prayer, right? Or I need to go from the left side or the right side. And look what happens next. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not believe in me to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them. Why in the world would this happen? Why in this world would this happen? Look, while God provides water on both occasions, God takes Moses' action as an attempt to take the glory away from God. And he has promised that he is unable to enter into the promised land. In this moment, he comes alongside, and the way I understand this, Moses with his muscles bulging and his staff flying, he's wanting to take the credit for this. And God goes, and that's why you won't enter the promised land. Nope, that's why the line crosses here. because he was being disobedient to God's word, and somehow he wanted the credit for it. And now it's remarkable, because if I'm God in that moment, there's no water coming from that rock. You can hit it 20 times, Moses. I don't care. I'm keeping it from you. But yet God is gracious to his people and lets water come out. But he doesn't let it come out the first time. He makes Moses sweat a little bit, right? Striking a little bit harder, right? Because he just knows. Well, turn over now to Deuteronomy chapter 32. Deuteronomy 32. We're almost done. It says in this is the song of Moses that he is preparing as he is at the end of his life. As he finishes that song, it says in verse 48, that very day the Lord spoke to Moses, go up this mountain of the Abiram, Mount Nebo, which is the land of Moab, opposite Jericho, and view the land of Canaan, which I'm giving to the people of Israel for possession, and die on the mountain which you go up, and be gathered to your people, as Aaron your brother died in Mount Or, and was gathered to his people. Because you broke faith with me in the midst of the people of Israel at the waters of Meribah Kadesh, and the wilderness of Zin, and because you did not treat me as holy in the midst of the people of Israel. For you shall see the land before you, but you shall not go there into the land that I'm giving to the people of Israel. So he tells them, look, you're not going to go there because of this one specific incident here. And Moses dies overlooking the location for which he had searched for 40 years and is buried on that mountain by God. If you turn over there, so he dies overlooking that location. If you go all the way to the end of Deuteronomy, it's chapter 34. It's a very short chapter that let me read to you. In chapter 34, verse 1, then Moses went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo to the top of Pisgah, which is opposite Jericho, and the Lord showed him all the land, Gilead, as far as Dan, all of Naphtali, the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah, as far as the western sea, the Negeb and the plain that is the valley of Jericho, the city of the palm tree, as far as Zoar. And the Lord has said to him, this is the land of which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, I will give it to your offspring. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not go over there. So Moses of the servant of the Lord died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. Listen to this. And he buried him in the valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor. Who did? God did. There's nobody else on this mountain. God has a private burial service, just him and Moses. It says, no one knows the place of his burial to this day. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eye was undimmed and his vigor unabated. That's an awesome line, by the way, to go out in, right? Man, Lord, give me some of that. The people of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. Then the days of weeping and mourning for Moses were ended. And Joshua, the son of Nun, was full of the spirit of wisdom when Moses had laid his hands on him. So the people of Israel obeyed him and did as the Lord had commanded Moses. Listen to this. And there has not arisen a prophet since in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. What a thought. That would be the testimony of Moses, that he was able to. And so God has this private burial service where Moses literally dies. And then he buries him there in this private burial service as a man that he knew face to face. And Moses gets to see the land but never put his feet on that land. And God lets him see it over the mountaintop, lets him look down into the valley. He can see it all and realize that his life goal of getting the people there were present. But yet he didn't make it to it himself physically because of his own sin. So Moses, who tried to be a substitute for the people, realizes that he's not even perfect. He's not holy enough. He's not righteous enough to get into it. And so he gets to see the land, but he never put his feet on the land. Or does he? So there's this moment. Jesus is getting ready. Final trek of ministry. Peter and James and John, come with me. I want to show you boys something. They go up there, and all of a sudden Jesus is transfigured before them. His clothes become radiantly white. He just looks different. And all of a sudden they see two people there. And they recognize him. Even though they've been dead a long time and they've never seen him face to face, they're just aware. There are two men. They are Moses and Elijah. Law and prophets. Law and prophets. And where is Moses standing in that moment? Promised land. Canaan. He got to put his feet on that dirt one more time. Well, actually, for the first time in his life. Now, I don't want you to miss this because this is just beautiful to me. I don't know how this works in heaven, but I can just picture Moses has been around there for a few thousand years. They're all kind of watching how everything's unfolding with Jesus, and he's going, this is awesome, man. This has been great. Wow, this is going. And all of a sudden, God goes, Moses, got one more job for you. I'm getting called back in, Coach? Yeah, I got one more job for you. Really? I've been on the bench for a few thousand years. This is awesome. What do you want me to do? I want you to go down there and be a part of a pivotal moment. Where am I going? Going to Canaan, son. That land that you worked for all your life, I want you to go down there one more time. And I want you to put your feet on there because you need to be a moment where the law and the prophets of the Old Testament are testifying that Jesus is the one that we've been waiting for. And I don't know this for sure, but I imagine that dirt felt really good to Moses. But I imagine being in the presence of Jesus is even better, even sweeter. This is what we were fighting for in the wilderness. This is the moment that everything has been pointing towards, and He's here, and He's about to go to the cross. He's about to be struck on the side, and life-giving water and blood is going to come from His side. This is what we have been waiting for here. God, He's enough. But thank you for this as well. Think about it this way. You think Moses ever prayed that he'd make it to the promised land? Guarantee he did. And follow this. Sometimes God will answer our prayers even after we're dead and gone. Thousands of years later, God says, I'll answer that prayer. You get there. But it was at a different timing that He wanted to. Moses dies while his eye was undimmed and his vigor unabated. And there has not arisen a prophet since an Israelite like Moses whom the Lord knew face to face. And so they wandered through the wilderness. But yet they make it to the promised land. And even more so, Moses is in a much better promised land than Canaan. Amen? Much better than a land flowing with milk and honey, but a land there present in the presence of Jesus. And so, Father, that's what we